I think we're live.
Are we live?
We're
This is
all the
gonna
lives.
this is gonna be an adventure today, folks.
Um, no diggity doubt. No diggity.
If you're just joining us, this may be the most realistic do the work ever.
Could be. Could be. How you doing today, Terry?
Look, I think I'm better than you. I mean, I logged on and you had no sound and you were struggling, and quite frankly, it was the angriest Phil Martin face I've seen in a long time. I was like scared for myself. I was like, what in the world is happening? Like, who robbed Phil of his joy? I didn't understand what was going on this morning, but it's already for those for the three people watching so far. It's well, yeah. Hey, strap up. It's going to be a fun ride because we don't even know where we're going today.
Do we actually ever know?
Well, we at least have a like theme. Like you have some ways like left me to my own devices, which I think we all know is pretty risky. That's
Yeah.
man, the only way to rein me in is at least I have a boundary set, a corral of some kind. But right now we have no fencing at all.
It's gonna be just fine. Everything's gonna be fine. Everything's fine. Everything's great.
Hey, this is a call-in show without a phone. If you're on Facebook right now and you got something you want us to talk about, why don't you put a comment out there? Because right now, I'm just gonna tell you, this is like we showed up at church and we left our notes at home. Like we are not sure where we're headed with this today. Help me, help you to help me to help you, kind of thing. That's where we're at.
Yeah, Terry's got a question in a minute, but I'll give backstory while he's figuring out his question. So last week I took my primary laptop into the Apple store for them to do some warranty service, and um, I really didn't spend the time to figure out how am I going to solve this particular problem this week of going on air until about 10:28.
Yeah, and so I sent Phil a text last night and say, you have any ideas? He goes to bed. He doesn't say anything. This morning, I'm like, hey, any ideas? He ignores me. And then finally, I'm
Yeah,
like,
nothing.
hey, and he writes back and he goes, how about don't be stupid? And I thought it was about me. And then I realized, no, Phil is the stupid one here. He didn't have a backup plan. Like, this is Mr. Technical. You guys got to understand, anytime Phil does anything, there's a spreadsheet for everything. Like, before he decides what kind of, like, salad dressing, he breaks it down and puts it in a spreadsheet and comes up with the consumer reports. And this is the brand. But this guy totally dropped the ball today. Let's just be honest about that.
Emotional
Yeah.
exhaustion is a real thing.
Yeah, you talk about COVID fatigue. We don't even know what we're talking about today because you don't even know how we're going to get on the air. This is unbelievable.
We're here.
Like you're,
Everything's good. Everything's
yeah,
good.
it's good, and it's so unbelievable. Like we've got 7 listeners; they're scared to say anything at this point. That's how crazy this is.
We
Oh
got it
wow!
all. We got it all solved.
Ooh, ooh, you just got really hot. By the way, like your mic went really loud, and we lost video confirmation of who you are.
Fixed it.
Mark Russell says this is some of our best work. How about that? All right. Wow. Now, oof, oof. Not now, Mark. Like I'm full screen. That's
Ha.
ooh. Yeah. Oh, I'm getting a private caller.
Oh, private caller. No, here's the
Okay.
thing.
I
We're
got it.
back.
I got us an idea we're probably going to go with here in a minute, but we
All
got a
right, it's good.
question first. Yeah. 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 We're good. Are you good?
I'm good.
Okay. I would ask you what the most stressful moment you've ever had in video broadcasting is, but we've all lived it with you the last 20 minutes. So here we are.
No, we've had worse.
All right. So, question is favorite Christmas present you ever got?
Let me go first. I've actually got an answer for that.
Yeah, why don't you go first?
So I saw this little bell curve graph a couple days ago that I've saved. I'll probably send it out in a few days,
Do
and
y'all see where we're going here? Like, we go from gift to a bell curve graph. That's
it sparked a
nerddom is
memory.
high.
So
Yeah.
growing up, my aunt Linda um, always, every single year, got every single cousin in our pretty large family on that side a bag of tube socks. That was her gift to everybody. And when you're a little kid, you don't care about tube socks. Like there's
Right.
nothing like it's almost from a kid's perspective, a very self-focused kind of perspective. Um, it would be better to get no gift than to open up tube socks.
Socks and underwear right there together. right? Yeah.
So two things have happened. My Aunt Linda has passed away, and that was quite a few years ago. And I'm older now. I gotta tell you, two things would be awesome. Talk to Aunt Linda, have a conversation with her, and open up tube socks from her underneath the tree. And you could always tell, like she wrapped them the same way every time, in the plastic bag with one layer of inexpensive wrapping over it. And you just knew this is what it was. And every single one of the cousins, sometimes my cousins who were unrelated to her would get tube socks from her because she knew they were going to be with us. And there's a level of sentimentality to that ties together with socks actually matter more to me now in some ways, because somebody in the house, namely my two boys, seem to just walk off with all my socks. So if I had tube socks.
And I get only one back. Is that how it happens in your house when it comes to socks? I get one back. Like, I'm like, how did that happen?
That's kind of morphed into my favorite gift received. And then the rest of it for me is gifts given. My favorite gifts are actually ones that have been given to others. What about you?
So oddly enough, it's socks, but there's a backstory to that. That when I got married, the way my mother-in-law, she was a compulsive shopper, right? So when she went out of town, that was how she traveled for work a lot. She shopped a lot, and she would shop and just store stuff in her trunk. And I remember the first Christmas that I was in the family. I can't remember if it was right before we got married or when we were married. Might have been right before we were engaged. That Christmas Eve, they're like going and getting stuff out of the trunk of the car and wrapping their own presents. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Like she's like, oh, go out to the car and get this because they don't have enough gifts. But for me, I got socks. Now, what was really funny about that is everybody else really didn't like the gifts that they got. But I got socks, and I loved my socks because there was $300 stuffed inside the socks. And I was just like over the moon. Yeah, I was like, yeah, give me socks. And so it became a thing like every year. My mother-in-law didn't really get me much except for socks with like money stuffed inside of it. And now everybody else wanted socks. I'm like, no, this is my thing. You guys can't have that. This is my thing. Like they were getting jewelry and shirts and dresses and shoes, and I was getting socks stuffed full of cash. And I was like, that's the way to go. Like I have this thing figured out. And for those who don't know, my mother-in-law, I think it'll be about, close to 14 years this January that she passed away. And so like you two, there's a sentimental thing to that a lot of good memories, a lot of fun memories. And we end up talking about that all the time, that I wish I could get socks. So oddly enough, it is socks. And like you, my kids, man, kids, it's Peyton. The girls don't borrow my socks. It's Peyton's fault. But he walks away with half of my socks, which means I have like one of each pair. That's what happens there. So anyway, well, look, I got a question that was texted to me, and I'm going to just say I think this has to stay anonymous, but we'll go with it. And it is, he says, here you go. How to have conversations with elders or deacons when the issue is them, not other brethren. Hence the anonymity of the question asker, lest anybody he attends with is listening to us today in the rare offshoot occurrence. And listen,
subtitle that right now: how not to get asked to labor in a new vineyard.
Yeah, I got to tell you too, like I'm being your best friend by not throwing your name out there. Let's just throw that there. So, but listen, I think this is a really important question because one of the issues at play here is not just the fact, Phil, that it's uncomfortable and awkward when you're in that situation. But as you just joked around, there's a little bit of anxiety that goes with that. Hey, if I confront the eldership about some bad decision or bad behavior, that may lead to me leaving. In that subject, let me say, I can tell you all the wrong ways to confront an eldership because I've written the book on that. I've got like a PhD in stupidity and how you address this issue. So I've learned from the School of Hard Knocks, and I'm just going to throw this out there too. Phil may not count right now because Phil is, let's just be honest. He's an elder too. So he's just like, it's not even his thing. He's not insulated. But again, it is an important question. So we'll throw that out there. That's where we'll go, and maybe update the show notes later as that's what the topic is. But how do we do that? How does that start, Phil? And I'll let you start off.
Well, there's some things that go from looking back. And you also want to think about what qualifies a person to step into that communal role of shepherding. It is a communal role. It's a shared labor. And so some of the things that are going to move them into that capacity, and this is also thinking about books like Crucial Conversations, books like Leadership and Self-Deception, are two great texts to have already in the idea factory of the group you're about to go address.
Correct.
First things you would want to actually have done is encourage them to read those two books or similar concepts to get them to a place where they're ready to have things like extreme ownership of failure, to be ready to fail forward when mistakes are made, and to praise when success takes place. One more thing that's really important in that is to own successes and failures in a specific way in leadership. So, and this is going to lead into my point in a second. If, say, someone who is legitimately subordinate to my rule as a father, as a leader in the community, and even as shepherds rule the flock in a legitimate sense, if they fail, sometimes, maybe most of the time, it is in part or exclusive that I didn't explain or teach them well enough. And so if they fail because they did not know the plan or I didn't help them execute the plan, then that's my failure, not theirs. If they succeed, this is the hard thing about leadership. It is their success, not mine.
Yeah, it's a lot like coaching. Yeah, it's a lot like coaching.
It's my job, my role, my responsibility to enable them to succeed. So their success is theirs, but my success is that I enabled them to do so. So that has to kind of already be there. So those leaders are very often going to be strong, convicted individuals that are not going to be pushed aside by the wind. And so you're going to need to reason with them on some level to bring them to the watering hole. Either you're going to push them there or lead them there. So I would actually realize that any conversation I have with an elder or an eldership or a deacon or the deacons is designed to lead to a destination, not to get there lickety split. So I might come in and say, look, this is what's going on. Let's break it down and figure out who owns what part of it. And then once we figure out who owns what part of it, we'll all take responsibility for the part of it that we own. By the way, this is the preacher's role. He does serve in this space of the two middle areas. And so it's really important to figure out, how do I do this? I've done this in the past. And actually, we still do this now with me in the dual role, where when the mistakes are made, if there are mistakes as shepherds, there are mistakes. And we acknowledge them, we move forward. If mistakes are made elsewhere, then those are those mistakes. And where do our leadership principles come into play to address those things? So that's probably like the first layer of things we've got to get on the table.
Yeah, I think one of the things, by the way, that plays into this is, like you said, the preacher is in this. And we like to kind of think that that's not true. Let me address that real quick. We like to really follow more of a business mindset kind of corporate model that's not really scriptural. And one of the side effects of that is that a lot of times the preacher's treated as an employee over here. He's kind of the only hireling in that situation. And so in that model mindset, it seems weird for the hireling to come into the shepherds, to use biblical terms, and for the hireling who's out in the flock, quote unquote, to go into the shepherds and tell them they're not shepherding right. But when you look at Timothy and Titus, you see this far more equivalent kind of role in this kind of area than we like to really see. I mean, in Titus 1, Paul says to do the things that are lacking, and what he includes of that is, hey, Titus, it's your job to find men to serve in this role, and you put them in that role. And which is interesting because, by the way, I don't know of, and maybe you do, Phil, I don't know of a place that we see an eldership in Scripture hiring the preacher like we practice today. But we do see a place where, for lack of a better terminology, the preacher chooses the elders in that sense, or helps make that happen. And I know for some people, I feel like I sound like a liberal, but that's just what the Scriptures teach. And then later, the other thing is in Timothy, when there's an issue with an elder, it doesn't say go to the other elders. It says go to the preacher, go to Timothy. And he tells him how to handle that. Don't accept the charge except with this kind of thing. All of that is to say, I'm not suggesting that the preacher's in some kind of pastoral oversight thing, but the scriptures do seem to make it pretty clear that one of the kind of ways this works out is if we figure out and ask the question, well, who shepherds shepherds, that kind of falls in some regards to the evangelist in this equation. It's at least how the biblical model is. And I don't know that we're really comfortable with that. I don't know that preachers or elders in our current model are always comfortable with that. And I think that's one of those ways where, quite frankly, we might have just departed slightly from this biblical kind of model to something that we've practiced out of traditional kind of practices. So I'll go ahead and be the guy that throws that up there and says this is one of the issues here. Now, go ahead, Phil. You're going to...
Well, I was going to say that there's at least one instance where we can think through, though it is certainly connected to the Spirit, Holy Spirit, where preachers are beckoned to come to certain areas, certain locations. I think we could also include the Church of Corinth writing to Paul, members to the group saying, in essence, come back, help us. So,
and I'm not saying that's an unscriptural practice. I'm just saying that's something that we accept as scriptural and standard, but we don't accept this other part of the equation in that same way. And that's something that's really just to challenge our thinking.
Right. And it's a fair thing to explore. In the end, again, you've got to lay out some, what are your goals moments? Like when you go into a conversation with individuals who are clearly your spiritual mentors, they're designed by God to be your guides, even though you're an evangelist or you're a member or you're a deacon. These individuals are your guides. Tone matters.
Sure.
Here's the thing. If I come at you with straight facts and I am rude and abrasive, you might accept it, but you will never accept me again. If I come at you with facts, with humility, you may accept it, but you will also accept me again. And that doesn't matter what role I'm in, whether I am in a specific high-end leadership role or am I in a low service role where I'm not very noticeable or not doing much in the project. And in the end, that simple shift of arrogance to humility will dramatically affect the outcome. And by humility here, I'm not talking about the general concept of humility. I'm limiting it right now specifically to a willingness to be corrected when wrong. And that will then change the tone of everything else.
You cannot enter these situations as you're the expert that has all the answers. You enter these situations as, hey, as you said earlier, let me put it this way. The way you really handle this is from the spirit of, we'll talk about specifics, but the spirit of, hey, this right here is not going the way it should. And how do we find that? Am I the issue? Where and you, by the way, this is where the problems when we have this kind of conflict. And this is what I've done in the past. I've gone in already with all the issues identified and all the solutions resolved in my head before I walk into any kind of conversation. And I want to go in and say, hey, here's the problem. Here's the people who are the problem. Here's how we fix it. And that's not the way to do this. The way to do this is go, hey, we're not being effective in this area. How do we address that? What do you guys think is going on? Where do you see some problems? And in the process, you get to share your concerns as well, maybe what you observe. And in the process of that, there's this group discussion rather than accusations. And what you want to do is be able to lead this in such a way where somebody goes, I dropped the ball on that. I could have done that better, where they start to see that rather than you making these accusations. That's kind of, I think, what our ultimate goal. Now, let me say this too. That one of the things I learned a long time ago in Toastmasters about how to handle these kind of stressful conversations, especially where there's going to be what we call constructive criticism, which doesn't usually feel constructive if you're the one receiving it, is you always want to sandwich that with some good stuff. Like you want to make sure. And I know that we've all seen this. We've all received it this way. We've all done it. Hey, look, here's some really great things that you do. It's been really fantastic. You want to point out the successes. So you might go, hey, look, our worship assembly It's just not measuring up. Now, here's some things in that assembly I think we do really well. Here's some things I think we're really excellent at. And here's why we're excellent at that. But here's an area where I just don't understand why we're not quite up to par. What can we do to fix that? Like, what do you guys see there? Do you see the same thing I see? Maybe it's me. Maybe I just need to see things differently. Or is it that maybe there's some things we need to fix in this regards, and that will help us out? How do we do that? And you want to create this kind of group discussion that is also couched in a lot of positives, right? But also, hey, here's our focal point. Here's kind of where we need to go. How do you think we get there? And you want that buy-in, and especially, by the way, I think that's especially crucial, Phil, when you're dealing with the elders, because there is that tension that's going to be there naturally, okay? And by the way, crucial conversations, one of the great things about that is you have to figure out a way to ask permission to bring this even up, right? You want them, in crucial conversations, one of the great things in that is kind of you want people to buy in and give you permission to even have the conversation before you go down that path. And so I think that's an important kind of point from that book that I think I've tried to carry with me. Not always done it well, but I'm aware of it. I just fail at it a lot.
So another way to think about this is to think about standing out by the breakers on the ocean, where the waves are starting to crash in, and your role in the initial part of the conversation is to be morally resolute, to not allow the emotional outpouring that will take place, whether it's strong in contrition or strong in defensiveness or strong in whatever. There's going to be this, hey, wait a minute, we know what we're doing. And so in that phase, that's when you're really required to be full bore, James-minded, slow to speak, swift to hear, where you lay out a concern. You say, this is an area where we can do better, or maybe where you have to be really specific, where you can do better, or I can do better. And let the whole cycle of catharsis take place. Because once the waves calm down and you move off the breakers, and now you're up on the shore, and it's just the lapping edges of the waves that come in, that's at a spot where someone can decide, now what? They process everything. It's all gone through. And this is not a one-day thing for if it's a really strong issue. Now, people are built differently as well. And so some folks, 5 minutes in, they're like, dude, that's all my fault. I did that. I need to fix that. How can we fix that?
Right.
Not everyone is built with that same pace of response.
Well, one of the things I think is really important in this, Phil, and you kind of hit on that there, is if you create a culture of more transparency in the leadership, where there's open dialogue of successes and failures, and especially the failure point, when you realize that maybe you didn't do something quite right. If you're the guy that comes into your next elders meeting and goes, hey guys, we had this thing go on, and I just want you guys to know I dropped the ball on that. Like, I messed that up, and I take ownership in that. And if you're the one that is, and if you build a culture where when there's a shortfall, that you are willing to say, hey, I messed this up. I got to do better here. Then when the time comes that you have something that you think needs to change a little bit, and you're the kind of person that willingly admits your faults, it creates a culture where that's allowed to be a more organic kind of thing and not as much tension and angst and all of that. So I think that's a powerful, important thing to keep in mind for people. You just create that culture of openness and that relationship, that one-on-one kind of discussion from that standpoint. And by the way, I think another issue is when it comes to deacons especially, seen this in a couple of places I've been at. If the only time you have a discussion with your deacons is when you have an issue, that's going to cause issues, right? Because what happens a lot of places is, and it's a fine line, like especially between the leadership of elders and deacons, there's a fine line between micromanaging your deacons and being in their business all the time, but also leaving them so much to do the work that you never have any communication. And if you don't find the balance in the middle of those two, then when it comes time that something's going on, but you've had no communication except for it's always some kind of problem, that's going to cause more problems because it's not going to create the right kind of environment to even find a good solution to your issues. Because what's going to happen is those deacons are going to feel like that they're underappreciated, and the only time you want to talk to them is when you want to put them in timeout. That's a bad combination for guys that are really important to your work. So make sure that you don't do that as well. And I think so. There's all of that to say, really, is a lot of this stuff. The way that you approach when there is an issue is you've got to have the right kind of culture and background before that moment hits, so that you have the right kind of relationship to handle the problem. Because if the only time you guys really talk about anything is when somebody has a problem with the other person, that's not going to be good for the church at all. Not going to be good for you, not going to be good for the elders, not going to be good for the deacons. So I think that's just an important part of that as well.
Yeah, I think as we kind of like think through some of those sequential things, one key item, which is always there, is to be aware of relationships. The strength and ebb and flow of your relationship with each of these key partners is a natural outgrowth of one simple component, the time you share together. Whether it's what you do, how you do it, when you do it, those things really do interface in a way that says this is the nature of our community and a community of leadership. My perception and perspective is deacons, elders, and evangelists, if you want to break them out that way, share in those areas. The sharing is slight overlap, but it is definitely shared, where nobody can do the work that God needs us to do on their own. And when you try to do it, that's when you have huge issues, huge breakdowns, and huge problems. By the way, I found it humorous that we both had equal requests for singing and not singing. On one of the various feeds. That's the one on my page. That was Hal Hammonds and Dan DeGarmo were equally divergent on requests for alternate titles today. Was that we talk about singing, which illustrates something.
Singing? Is that what you're saying?
They wanted us to sing.
They wanted the two of us to sing?
Yes. We don't want that.
What do they want us to sing?
Yeah, I don't know, but we don't want that.
No. This is no. There's video if you want to hear me sing. It's out there. You don't need that today.
I may or may not have video.
Yeah. Well, so, yeah. And so what you just said, by the way, reminded me, I think it's Harley's book, His Needs, Her Needs. I may have the wrong book, but I think it was His Needs, Her Needs that used the bank account illustration for marriage, and that you have an account. And the whole thing is you want to make more deposits into your love account than withdrawals, because what happens is if you keep withdrawing in the relationship, then you overdraft your account in essence.
Yeah.
And I think there's some value applying that to this. Like when it comes to deacons and elders and preachers, they need to have good relationships. To be quite honest, they need to be friends. They need to be friends outside of worship and outside of the boardroom or wherever you meet. You need to be friends. And you need to invest and deposit way more into their account than you withdraw. That's the challenge.
So let me synthesize this, because Hal asked a related good question. I think it's probably in this basket. For going into those conversations, remember you're not solving it today. You're setting the groundwork for an opportunity to solve it over time. And I'm saying that particularly to instances when sin is not on the table. These are matters of judgment, matters of improvement, matters of deep spiritual value, but we're not talking abject or direct rebellion to God. So it's a start.
No deadline on those issues. You can't have a deadline on those.
Right.
That's the
thing.
So
it's a start. It begins with clear facts presented with humility, so that everybody involved has the proper perspective for all that's entailed and involved. With those two things together and a good relationship existing between the group of people involved, if you give it time, because you love one another, you'll work it out.
Right.
If you don't love each other, if there's lack of humility on your part or others, that'll all become apparent. Much like for those who don't have congregations around them with shepherds, if you go to a men's business meeting, it's really simple. If you want to know what a person behaves like at home, look at how they behave in a business meeting.
Yeah.
So
Which
that's
will
the
make you pray for their
indicator.
family sometimes. Let's be
That's the
honest. That's just,
indicator of how they see everything in life. If they love you, their behavior will be obvious in those business meetings. If they love their family, it'll be obvious in those relationships. If you love your family, it'll be obvious in all those corners. And I'm talking about the family of God. Now at this point, I've kind of shifted the table. Hal
it's
actually
kind of,
asked a
it's kind of
related
funny, by the
question,
way.
but go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. It's kind of funny because along those lines, I remember several years ago we were in a conference kind of call with Max Dawson, who had written at the time Kingdom Leaders, and so when we did that, we in this conference call, somebody said, we've studied through your book, and I've gone over this with the elders, and man, it just seems like they're so resistant to change. I'm not seeing any change. And I'll never forget Max said, well, you need some patience because you studied a book in 3 months, but it took almost 29, 30 years. I can't remember the number, 30 years for us to make these changes where I'm at. And it's going to take a while for you too. And I think that sometimes is the issue. Like especially for me, I know the problem is, hey, I read a book or I see something like, hey, this just is the way it's got to be. Like this is the answer. And you go in and you say, hey, here's what we got to do. And the response is, well, let us think about that. And it drags on and you get frustrated. Hey, sometimes these things take time. It takes a lot of time. Some of the things that you may think need to be changed, that may be the way they've done it for 20 years there. And they're not going to leave that kind of thing. And by the way, you can complain about tradition, but all of us are traditional to some extent. We all have things that we do based on tradition, whether it's how you make your chili or where you sit in the church building. You got your own traditions. And you need to acknowledge that and realize that you like your traditions. You need to be mindful and patient of other people in regards to that as well. By the way, to Michael Walls, we don't want you to hang a TV for us. We're both capable of doing that. I have no idea how somebody with your intelligence could post on the wrong thread. I'm sorry, but that was just, I'm laughing at that, actually.
He shaved his beard off. He shaved his beard
Yeah,
off.
is that what it is? And part of his brain is leaking out through the hair follicles of his beard? I mean, what is up with that?
That's precisely what's taking place.
Yeah.
Hal, your question about any tips for preachers newly serving as elders, we can direct that to Walls as well. Once his beard grows back, he'll be able to answer these questions. And I'll talk about this, not just preachers. Terry made a great point in the Kingdom Leadership book of patience. One of the things I did when I stepped into the role that I'm still doing is regularly interact with shepherds who have been doing the work of a shepherd for a very long time and ask them very specific questions that I needed to get a handle on, whether it was planning for the future for the work. And here's some specific examples of how that kind of plays out. One of the things that I was curious about is what do we do with someone who is teetering on the edge of faithfulness and unfaithfulness? How do we work with a person like that? I understand what I might do as an evangelist. Do things shift as an elder? And they do. And so learning those kind of things, I'm not going to go into great detail, but in a very simple sense, you may choose how you decide to kind of like put them in new spaces that are safer for them. Maybe encourage them to be around different people. Maybe back off on your preacher level relationship and shift your conversation to a shepherding model, which is more about, hey, come follow me, rather than, hey, this is what God said. Both of those have value in that interaction. Secondly, as much as possible, for Hal's specific question, try to shift the things that make people uncomfortable about an evangelist who is also an elder off of your table. And I'll be very specific. Your wages can be shifted off your table. In many ways, that's more about a deacon's realm than an elder's realm. Making sure that maybe you're not the one who counts the contribution is probably a wise thing to do anyway. You may need to be on official paperwork for the congregation. That's fine. But it might be wise to have multiple parties involved so there's no question in regards to your integrity and authenticity in those roles. And so
And
those are
don't
like
sign your paycheck. Don't sign your paycheck, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea there. Try to do some insulation, some insurance there around those things. I mean, Walls points out too. It's good to have other men outside of your group to get advice from. And look, by the way, I think we as preachers have done that for years, right? We talk to each other about things all the time, and elders should practice that as well. I think another thing is, Phil, you mentioned 2 books that every so often I pull out and reread, believe it or not, even though there's this idea that I don't read, but especially Leadership and Self-Deception, I probably read more than anything else, and it's about time for me to pull that out again and reread that. There are some things out there that are good books. By the way, if you've not read Leadership and Self-Deception, you need to order that book today if you're in a leadership position. That's how I feel. I feel very strongly about that. I feel that way about Crucial Conversations. So strongly that when I have internships, those are 2 required reading books, regardless of what other books come out. Those things are, to me, just that important. And not just read them one time, but go back every so often. And whether you read the whole book or you read a couple of chapters that remind you, that you refresh yourself about, hey, these are some really powerful leadership principles. And also be looking for other books. I was talking to a friend this week, and I can't even there's a leadership based on, I think, The Wizard of Oz. I can't even remember the title now, but another one, you may know that one, Phil, the Man of Oz or something like that. That there's books like that are, by the way, are not biblical based books that have a lot of great stuff to help us understand how to accomplish these things. By the way, what's really interesting about especially Crucial Conversations is that it was a very data-driven book with some heavy research that went into it. And that's why it's very powerful, is it wasn't just some guy that said, hey, this is what's worked for me. They actually talked to a lot of different people and a lot of different kind of spheres of influence and came up with these principles. And that's why it's so powerful and I think legitimate to consider. And it has a great application to us in the church, in leadership. So read some of those books and try to stay up on, how do I maintain my influence? How do I maintain my leadership ability? Make that part of who you are. And by the way, that advice is for all leaders, but especially I think elders and preachers especially, to continually be doing that kind of thing.
Right. And then let me kind of tie one last thing in as we kind of close out for our conversation today. If you think about the initial question that was asked, how do we go to our elders and deacons when we're directly addressing something that's in their wheelhouse, that's their responsibility, et cetera, is to think about the combination of the little tidbits that Michael and Hal dropped as well, with this in mind. There's a book written by Peter LeConte that's called The Ideal Team Player. It principles out the ideas of character traits of humble, hungry, and smart. That integrated aspect of our behavior that says if we can accomplish those 3 things together, our team will be successful. So when you go to someone for the goal of correcting a problem that you identify, you are equally saying, I can be the problem. I might be the problem, or I am the problem. But it becomes a we fix it moment. Even if you really believe that's the other guy. Now, here's a value point. We can get to a circumstance where we become unwilling to listen to others. And we've determined that the problem is with this guy or this other guy or another guy. Like Michael points out, you've got to have someone you can go to for advice who has a strong enough relationship with you to tell you, hey, no, he's not the problem. In reality, you're the problem. And that may not be somebody who has all the look of being your mentor. One of the great moments for me was from a younger guy, his good friend Evan, and I was asking him about how my preaching was going. And he said, sometimes it's really good. And there's a time about once or twice, every couple of months where it's not good at all. And he's like, you need to figure out why that happens. And I'm like,
canoe trips.
I probably need more canoe trips. But you got to have that person who has enough confidence in your relationship and you have enough confidence in them that not only will they say it, but when they say it, you'll address it. That'll prevent you from going into these meetings and being like, you guys are all the problems. Because
Yeah,
folks will see that you've acknowledged a problem, you've fixed the problem, they will trust you when you bring that to the table another time.
yeah. One of my frustrations about the work of a preacher for almost, I guess, 24 years or going a little past that is it seems to be that most of our conversations about the work of the church are always problem focused. And I think that we've created a culture, especially in the leadership meetings, that really is focused on a lot of negativity. And so one of the things I think is really important in this arena is just to point out we got to do some more rejoicing and some more celebration about our successes. And that doesn't mean that we're not humble, okay? We can do that and give the glory to God. But there needs to be some times where we have conversations about, hey guys, this went great. This was a really good thing we did. This was fantastic. And by the way, most of the times we do that, it's like, hey, this was good. How can we do better? No, sometimes it just means, hey, this was great. This worked out. We had a lot of good comments. This was fantastic. And just leave it alone. That doesn't mean you don't come back later, maybe think about what you could do or whatever, but sometimes you just need to have some rejoicing. One of my kind of things that has kind of worn on my end of the stick that has frustrated me over time is that sometimes it feels like the only time the preacher and the elders really talk is when there's an issue. And if I feel that way as the preacher, that the only time they want to talk to me is when they have a problem, they probably feel that way when it's me wanting to talk to them as well. So part of this, I think, is just making a focused effort to celebrate our wins more often. And to have those moments of joy, and that's what I was trying to get at with the bank account analogy. You need to try to create more moments of success, more moments of praise, more moments of joy than moments of conflict and correction. And if you've been involved in business meetings or elder meetings on any kind of level, you know that is not the way we typically conduct ourselves. And so I'd like to, we're kind of wrapping up, believe that one of the focuses is if you will do that, if you will create more celebration and joy moments, when you have these issues, they will go better. They will go better because people know that when things go right, you're going to acknowledge that, you're going to celebrate it, you're going to praise it, you're going to rejoice, you're going to glorify God because it went right. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Well, I do want to thank everyone for hopping in. We appreciate your suggestions for special topics, and maybe we can satisfy the request for our dulcet tones at another time.
No,
but beyond that, we want to remind you of a couple of things. One, we're always happy to dig into any questions you have that involve your work as evangelist. If Terry and I can help you in some way about it, please let us know. And whatever you're doing, we do hope that you are a blessing to those around you and that God